So next up we have Karen Straughan, also known as girlwriteswhat, and I'm really excited to have her here. Karen is a videographer and a very talented speaker that that has been offering a level of just an encyclopedic knowledge.
Now I'm gonna fall.
Okay. Well, you're gonna have to sit there and deal with it. She has she has an encyclopedic knowledge on gender, and she's been referred to as the gateway drug to non-feminist perspectives because she has a way of bringing about an understanding of the way we've developed as a culture and the biases that we've established, and is able to look at it even through a biological and evolutionary perspective, which gives people a new way of looking at all of the evidence in a new light. And Karen has published, has amassed a very great following on YouTube, and her videos are cited over and over and over again. You can even find her in new speaking engagements. She spoke at the New York Libertarian Party. She spoke on a panel with Naomi Wolf, which is hilarious. You have to see it. And in essence, she offers a way of, I mean, I just don't know what to say. I can't articulate how awesome she is. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of let that be the climax of that. Please help me welcome girlwriteswhat Karen Straughan.
Today, not so much to talk specifically about men in education, but to talk about feminism in all of society, including education, academia, its influences, and why I think that we need to make a change throughout our society. And I'm also here to tell you something that you probably don't really know or don't get to hear a whole lot, and a lot of people never ever hear it. Hi, Gladys. And that is that feminism is optional. It is not compulsory. I've done a lot of traveling since I started my YouTube channel, and I really hate it. But especially traveling by plane. But an interesting thing happens when you get on a plane. You end up squashed in next to some complete stranger, and you're stuck there making awkward conversation. And some of you might be shocked by this, but I can be a little talkative at times. And I find myself in lengthy conversations with my seat partners on planes that invariably start something like this. So, why are you headed to Wisconsin? Well, I'm giving a talk at a political convention. Well, that's really interesting. What will you be talking about? Now, the first few times I was really circumspect about describing what it is I do. I'd say, oh, gender politics, or something vague like that, and I'd hope that they'd just be like, assume she's a feminist. She's got short hair, comfy shoes, it's all good. You know, or maybe just ease into the subject, test the waters, dance around the topic a little bit, you know how you do that. But after the first little bit, it wasn't really too long before I just started to just blurt it out. Just spit it out there. Oh, I'm an anti-feminist. I'll be criticizing feminist theory and advocacy and spreading awareness of men's issues like unfair custody arrangements, male victims of domestic violence, things like that. And the response is kind of like this look that expresses like a combination of surprise, bafflement, incredulity, and curiosity, as if I've just announced with a perfectly straight face that I am a unicorn. I am some mythical creature that they had all heard about but weren't really sure existed. And at least not in the form of someone who looks like me and is sitting next to them on a plane. And then something really interesting happens. I start to explain my position, why I'm an anti-feminist, and the person next to me, doesn't matter if it's a young man or a woman in her 70s, will begin to share stories of how they, or men they know and care about, have been harmed by systemic discrimination, some of which they will concede has been created, ignored, or exacerbated by feminism. They will have sons who got expelled from school. They will have sons who were abused by their girlfriends and ended up going to jail themselves. They had sons or husbands who were reamed in divorce court and are paying child support and alimony that they cannot afford for kids that they do not see because they cannot see them. They will talk about all of these things. They'll say things like, the problem with feminists is they demand too much. Or, feminism's kind of like unions. They were necessary at one time, but they've just taken things way too far. And it's not just on planes that I do this. I do it at work too. Everybody that I work with, this is not a self-selected sample. It's a sample of working class people who work in the hospitality industry. None of whom applied for a job that said non-feminists only. Not just with my employers and coworkers either. Regular customers who come into the restaurant and ask why I'm working so much less these days. I tell them, well, I've been doing a bit of traveling to conferences to speak about how I feel feminism has damaged society and how it harms men and children. And the really strange thing is I don't get a whole lot of bad reactions. In fact, I don't think I've had a single person get outraged with me. Out of the hundreds of people that I've talked about about it, just at random and in person, at the grocery store, at work, at Home Depot, wherever, none of them have ever acted with outrage while they're invariably shocked. And I assume part of that's because the way I present doesn't tend to get associated with anti-feminists. No one ever seems particularly offended, and when I explain the whys and wherefores, the most startling thing happens. Emerging from those conversations are acres and acres of common ground between the average person and a person like me. So how could this be? Have I just been lucky? Do I just have a knack for looking at a person and somehow knowing this is someone I can talk to about feminism and how I feel about it? Does this whole thing work like gaydar? Maybe, but I don't think so. There's an assumption in our society that feminism is not just a popular philosophy, but a populist one, when the reality is actually anything but. And this is why it is so sad that it dominates academia the way it does. There's an interesting phenomenon in group psychology that economists and logicians have dubbed mutual knowledge. Renowned linguist and proponent of evolutionary psychology, Steven Pinker, described it as follows. In individual knowledge, A knows X and B knows X. In mutual knowledge, A knows X, B knows X, A knows that B knows X, B knows that A knows X, A knows that B knows that A knows X ad infinitum. And this is a difference that has profound consequences. For example, why is freedom of assembly enshrined as a fundamental right in a democracy? And why are political revolutions often triggered when a crowd gathers in a public square to challenge the president in his palace? It's because when people were at home, everyone knew that they loathed the dictator, but no one knew that other people knew that they knew. Once you assemble in a place where everyone can see everyone knows that everyone else knows that everyone else knows that the dictator is loathed, and that gives them the collective power to challenge the authority of the dictator, who otherwise could pick off dissenters one at a time. This is why freedom of assembly and freedom of speech are enshrined in our democracies. And this is what terrifies me about what is happening on campuses across not just the United States, but Canada and elsewhere. So imagine it, here I am. I'm a single person who knows, I'm just an A who knows X, sitting on a plane, and right there beside me is a B who knows X, sitting on the same plane, and until one of us has the gumption or the motivation to begin a conversation about X, we are like those people in their homes, isolated from one another, secretly loathing the dictator and not daring to say anything, because if we do, we may be picked off individually the way other dissenters tend to be. And then the conversation begins. The state of our knowledge has fundamentally shifted to a mutual modality. And this becomes particularly pertinent when considering the fact, not the opinion, but the fact that feminism is a minority position in society. Recent surveys done across the West have consistently demonstrated that people who identify as feminists comprise 25% or fewer of the adult population. At the same time, just as consistently, around 80% or more of adults surveyed say they are in favor of gender equality. Now, clearly there's something about equality between the sexes that appeals to people in general, and something about feminism that really doesn't. About half of all adults consider themselves to be pro-equality, yet non-feminist, or even worse, anti-feminist. Dun dun dun. Yet, feminism as a brand or a trademark is considered the mainstream default in much of our news, political and artistic media, particularly portions of them that lean to the political left, and in academia, and in government. Mainstream mass media and its conglomerates reserve column space or even entire sections devoted not just to women's interest pieces and women's issues, but to feminist opinion and analysis of them. Jessica Valenti, founder of Feministing, writes regular columns for The Guardian online. Feminists write and opinionate as feminists in virtually every popular media source on the planet, other than places like Fox News or Breitbart.com. The far right is the only portion of the political spectrum that just isn't that into feminism. While center right, center left, and far left all provide a voice and a space for feminist ideas. Meanwhile, those in media and politics who are both pro-equality and non-feminist keep their heads down and their mouths shut. Their official position is that they have no opinion, and for good reason. Just the other day, UK Prime Minister David Cameron was called on the media carpet to answer for his refusal to join other MPs in a photo op wearing "This is what a feminist looks like" t-shirt. His response to journalists that he is for equality, but not so into labels, was deemed inappropriate, inadequate, and offensive by many. What's even more intriguing, given the rising awareness in the public of how women, especially young college-aged women, are distancing themselves from the feminist movement, is that Cameron's opinion on the matter is the populist opinion. If 20% of people in the UK don't believe in equality and 25% consider themselves feminists, and frankly, from my investigations, there's some overlap there. This really does leave well over half of British adults essentially agreeing with David Cameron. Non-feminist gender egalitarianism is the cultural value in the UK, yet the mainstream press made quite the story out of how David Cameron decided not to wear a feminist t-shirt and considered his rationale for not doing so to be inadequate. This is how people are punished for dissenting. How is it that a politician taking the moderate, reasoned populist stance has to explain himself to the press? How is this something that it requires a justification, let alone an apology? Well, we could ask Marissa Mayer or Lady Gaga or Bjork or any number of prominent women who've been lambasted by feminists for the dire crime of merely eschewing the label. To hear many feminists talk, there is no good reason for any woman in any society not to wear the badge of feminism. To hear many feminists talk, one cannot be in favor of equality without being a feminist. Like the Lady Gagas out there have discovered, a successful liberal woman claiming "I'm not a feminist" is simply inexcusable. The reasons such non-feminist women give seem sensible enough to most people. Things like, "I don't like labels. I think the idea of equality is more important than a word." Or, "Feminism has taken a rather dim view of men, and the word has become associated with that." Or, "Feminism was a movement for equal rights, and women have that now under the law." Or, "Humanism is a more inclusive and appropriate term in my opinion." The default response from feminist websites seems to be to publish an article about how this person is wrong about feminism, how despite what anyone else feels, feminism doesn't and has never hated men and does not advocate for female supremacy, how feminism is the light and the way and the sole path to equality, and any woman who sees things differently is either stupid or brainwashed. They seem very, very, very committed in their beliefs. Worse still, she's an ingrate who has no appreciation for the rights she enjoys, even as she hypocritically exploits the very rights, self-determination, liberation, and freedom of expression that to bash the very people who supposedly provide them to her. You know, feminists. Nearly always left out of their analysis is any critical examination of the possible words and deeds of feminists that have led people, perhaps, to believe somehow that, I don't know, it might contain an anti-male streak a mile wide, or that maybe, just maybe, it's more a women's interest movement than an equality movement, or that it's comprised in large part these days of hypersensitive, privileged, and yet simultaneously hyper-aggressive warriors who can find oppression of women in anything and everything, the way a highly religious person could find Jesus' face in a piece of toast. Or even that maybe feminism has been so incredibly successful that it accomplished all its core goals and now it can put up its feet and crack a cold one. They won't even accept that. So, how have they managed it? You know, how have they managed to trick us all into thinking feminism is a majority position, the accepted moderate position, and those of us who are indifferent to it or oppose it are in the vast minority? Well, part of it is that feminism is a political ideology with a set of goals as vaguely defined and amorphous and ever-changing as they may be. The most passionate adherents of any political ideology will be the most active in promoting its ideals, and the most determined to have the ideology dominate the cultural discourse, all aspects of the cultural discourse. They are the most likely to engage in activism and protest, to raise awareness, to join lobby groups, to choose careers in government, education, and media that will best help them affect law and policy and spread their message. They are most likely to run for office or volunteer to campaign for a politician who represents their views. Feminism has a core of very motivated adherents. And in the 1970s, many of them got a foothold in Western academia through women's studies. And many of the women who founded women's studies, who were pioneers in women's studies, if you actually take the time to read their writings, they could have been plucked from the hallways of a mental institution, handed a fake PhD, and told, do something with it. Now, one does not need to be a conspiracy theorist or have a collection of tinfoil hats to assert that feminism has this stranglehold on gender discourse in the media, politics, government, legislation, education, and academia. All you need to do is acknowledge that people are people and people will do what people do. The most passionate and extreme of any ideological system will try to instill that ideology in every single aspect of society, in every single institution. You will see this with religions, you will see this with feminism, you will see this with any ideology, any belief system. We want everyone to think like us. We want everyone to believe like us. Feminism is no different. Just because it's about women, women do not get off the hook on this one, right? They are just as bad, women are just as bad for pushing their views and wanting to have the entire world swallowed up by their views when they feel very passionately about them. Another part of the reason is that feminists don't really tell us anything revolutionary or new about men and women. It's wrong to beat your wife? Yeah, we kind of figured that out. As recently as the late 1800s, beating your wife in the US was punishable by public flogging. And yet somehow we've been led to believe that we didn't know it was wrong until feminists came along in the 60s to tell us. Rape is bad when men do it to women. Newsflash, feminism, we used to execute men who raped women. Pretty sure we realized that it was a socially undesirable behavior before you guys arrived on the scene to show us all the light. How about this novel idea feminists supposedly invented? Women who are abused by their partners or ill-used by their partners should not be held criminally responsible when they murder them. Oh wait, that's not a new thing either. All-male juries up to the 1910s had that one covered. In fact, a fascinating national conversation was going on among opinion editorials of several major US newspapers. In the 1920s, a conversation debating the merits of granting women automatic immunity from prosecution when they killed men, since it was virtually impossible to get an all-male jury to convict one, even if she murdered him out of jealousy, revenge, or spite. To attempt to put a woman behind bars for killing a man, especially if that man was romantically involved with her, was like pulling teeth and largely seen as a waste of taxpayer money. Now that's oppression of women for you. Feminism, unlike other movements that actually do promote new ways of doing things, like the civil rights movement, the abolitionist movement, and even the prohibition movement, movements that actually seriously challenge the status quo, feminism has a number of advantages when it comes to promoting its agenda, while simultaneously suppressing the kind of mutual knowledge needed to challenge its hegemony. And I'm going to give an example. Contrary to what feminists tell us, society has always known that abusing women is wrong. There's a reason why some of the misogynistic tropes described by pop culture critic Anita Sarkeesian are so common in fictional media, going back hundreds of years. What is a trope? It's basically a literary shortcut that conveys information to the audience in the quickest possible time through two-dimensional cues that create a three-dimensional assumption. Plainly speaking, when a trope is used, the mind of the observer is able to leap from A to Z without having to think through all of the letters in between. We are shown A and we assume Z without having to logic our way through B and C and D and E. In her series on video games, Sarkeesian describes variations of a trope she calls women as background decoration. This is an academic program that she is creating. This is going to be used in curricula, in the humanities, in sociology, in women's studies, in universities that choose to use it. Women as background decoration. In one variation, violence against women is utilized as a set piece to convey information about the setting to the player. This fictional universe is a bad, dark, nasty place. How can you tell? Because many of the non-playable male characters there beat up, terrorize, kill, and sexually assault women. You don't have to logic your way to understanding how horrible and brutal this place is. It's right there in front of you every time some male set piece assaults a female one. You see it happening and you jump from A to Z in one big emotionally charged rush. In addition, violence against women is used to essentially identify the bad guys. Of course they're the bad guys, they brutalize women. No more information needed. We don't need to learn anything about their cultural values other than that, or their political system, or their history. We see them brutalizing women and we know they're bad. They just are. We just know. In another variation, violence against women is perpetrated by one or more of the villains in front of the player, which provides, Anita says, the emotional kick the player needs to motivate him to defeat the bad guy. Now, if men in general did not viscerally disapprove of violence against women, those tropes would be about as effective as a stillborn baby, and content creators would not be using them. So let's take a look at how these tropes get used in the world outside of fiction, not by novelists or screenwriters or game developers, but by feminists. Feminists have had these wonderful age-old tropes about women to exploit, that women are kind, nurturing, typically well-intentioned, delicate, and should be protected from violence. This is a very different set of prejudices than those that say the civil rights movement had to overcome. Blacks were historically seen as dangerous, brutal, uncivilized, animalistic, and prone to physical and sexual violence, as victimizers or potential victimizers. In fact, the KKK and other racist organizations engaged in some of the same kinds of propaganda feminists do today. They just had a narrower focus of black men as victimizer of white women, rather than feminism's broader focus of all men victimizing all women. So, some of the claims feminists make boil down to their essence. Patriarchy is a bad system because patriarchal norms encourage and endorse violence against women. In this case, violence against women is the set piece feminist content creators use to prove patriarchy is a bad, dark, and nasty place that needs heroes to change it. Sounds like a trope to me, whether feminists realize it or not. And I think, actually, it's a particularly misogynistic one in their hands. How about this narrative that gets spun in the media? A feminist, let's use Anita Sarkeesian as an example, has received rape and death threats, probably from straight white male, woman-hating trolls, defending their right to play misogynistic video games that harm women in the wider culture. We have now effectively identified the bad guys in this game of hers, haven't we? And we've motivated players in the media to kick those guys' asses on her behalf because they went right from A to Z without even thinking about any of the letters in between. How about this one? Emma Watson recently addressed the UN to promote her new equality initiative, He for She. Sounds very equal. While she spoke to some of the problems facing men and boys in society, things like suicide and the denigration of fatherhood, she also stated, quote, "We don't want to talk about men being imprisoned by gender stereotypes, but I can see that they are. When they are free, things will change for women as a natural consequence. If men don't have to be aggressive, women won't be compelled to be submissive. If men don't need to control, women won't have to be controlled." Stereotyping men as aggressive and controlling, check. Stereotyping women as victims of this toxic masculinity, check. And now the big appeal for good men to step up and be the heroes, the players who fight for women's equality. I want men to take up this mantle so their daughters, sisters, and mothers can be free from prejudice, but also so their sons have permission to be vulnerable and human too. If feminism is the radical notion that women are human and women therefore deserve to be liberated from gender roles, then what did that statement just say about men? They need to be liberated from gender roles in order to become human. Somehow, few in the feminism or the mainstream have any ability or willingness to explore the implications of that statement, or the fact that the He for She pledge Ms. Watson wants men to commit to says absolutely nothing about stepping up to combat sexism and violence against everyone, just women and girls. Now, according to Anita Sarkeesian, in the game of patriarchy, women aren't the opposing team, they are the ball. Yet her media interviews and speaking engagements are more often about her victimization at the hands of the straight white male cyber mob than about the video games themselves. And in them, she lauds all the good people out there who donated 26 times as much money as she'd been asking for to her project. Villains or heroes, there seems to be no other role available to men, at least as far as feminists are concerned. And now we're going to get into the way people like me and Sage and Janice have been treated on campuses, have been treated by university students sent to protest them by their women's studies professors as part of their women's studies program. There's video footage, you don't need to shake your head. Just look it up on YouTube. Another way feminism protects its hegemony is through vilification of its critics, all in accordance with the tropes I've described. I know Sage could tell us a few things about that, and I'm sure he will, so I won't go into his case here. At the same time, it is appallingly easy to poison public sentiment toward an individual, especially a man who dares to challenge feminism. Earlier this year, Wall Street Journal columnist James Taranto came under heavy feminist fire for an article in which he asserted that when a man and a woman are both equally drunk, equally willingly, and both decide to have sex, there is no reason other than sexism to assume that the man is a perpetrator of rape and the woman his victim. Within 24 hours, a dozen or more articles were published in feminist and mainstream media calling for him to be fired. The National Organization for Women issued a press release demanding he be dismissed from the Wall Street Journal. Twitter exploded with angry tweets calling him a rape apologist, a bigot, a misogynist, and a troglodyte. They also said he had a little dick. Taranto is lucky enough to generate enough income for the Journal to have kept his job, but it can't have been very pleasant for him. Not so lucky was Bill Frezza recently, who wrote an article for Forbes recommending fraternities not admit into their parties young women who've been pre-gaming, that is, for those of you who aren't in college at the moment, drinking in advance of a party, for safety concerns. His crime was that his primary concern was as someone advising fraternities, their safety, the men's safety. Not to protect the young women from rape, but more to protect the young men in the house from potential liability should anything happen to a drunk girl on their property. Oddly enough, most of the outrage from feminists online happened to be about things Frezza didn't even say. They just inferred that he meant them, while mostly ignoring the things that he did say. Within hours, Forbes had pulled the offending article and had fired Bill Frezza. Other men have had to step down from prominent positions after feminists took offense to their words or behavior. Larry Summers was forced to step down from his position as president of Harvard for the dire crime of saying that when you think about heredity alone, there are more male idiots than female idiots and more male geniuses than female geniuses. This was interpreted by many feminists as him asserting that men are smarter than women, though oddly enough, no one had much of a problem with his claim of male dominance in the idiot department. Justin Vikula, a prominent figure in the US skeptic community, voluntarily resigned his position as head of his chapter after falling afoul of feminists who campaigned to have him removed. His crime? Criticizing a feminist member of the community who was attempting to censor a free and open debate of certain issues. The common thread in all of these incidents has been a tendency by feminists to paint any and all criticism of feminism as potentially harmful to women. Taranto was not, according to them, raising a valid point about double standards. He was engaging in rape apology and posing a threat to all women everywhere. Summers was not positing a hypothesis as to why women may not achieve as often as men at the highest reaches of academic ability in math and physics. He was asserting that women are inferior and posing a threat to the advancement of women in academia. Society reacts the way it always does when it feels its women are endangered by words or actions of men, like the mobs of angry men who hanged out countless black men in the US prior to our shift in attitudes about black people. Society acts to quash the perceived threat with little care for fact-finding or the importance of the blindness of justice. Think of the protests to this event organized by feminists here at KSU, not leaflets disputing the differences of opinion between their position and KSUMen, not a counter-argument, a list of facts and links, not a dialogue or even the argument that KSUM is unnecessary. It was an elaborate artistic protest about rape and rape victims, casting this event and KSUM as a potential threat to women. And who could blame them? Why give up on a strategy that has worked so well for so long, that has kept so many people terrified to speak up, lest a day be branded with the scarlet M for misogynist? You bunch of misogynists. There are now, finally, some alternative voices on gender issues being heard, and one of the reasons for this is that the internet has many fewer gatekeepers than the mainstream media. Anyone can start a blog and put their opinion out there. Anyone can access a wide variety of research on things like domestic violence, sexual assault, educational attainment and outcomes, and other social problems we perceive as gendered, sometimes in the wrong direction. Anyone can leave a comment on a news piece challenging the assertions made therein and present a counter-argument with counter-evidence. Public opinion is beginning to shift, and it is actually starting with the speaking out of young, college-aged women. Young women who are saying, over Twitter, over Facebook. This is why I am not a feminist. I am not a feminist because I'm giving their reasons, right? And if feminism wants to have any credibility left by the end of this cultural dialogue, whatever we are allowed to have of a cultural dialogue between ourselves and feminism, if they want to have any credibility left, they're going to have to actually think about why so many people think feminism doesn't like men. Why could this be? How could this have happened? I mean, we only say nonstop that masculinity is toxic, that patriarchy, right? The mere fact that men are in charge creates an unjust society. This equates to men necessarily being unjust inherently, right? That if there's not 50-50 representation in the Senate, then some horrible, horrible oppression of women is taking place. But when there's 96% representation of men in workplace deaths, right? And 40% representation of men in post-secondary education, and there's 95% representation of men in the prison system, much of it due to bias, right? That's not oppression. You know, maybe it's oppression of women. Who knows? Anyone can get the information that I use. I don't have some golden ticket to some vault somewhere where this is all kept. Just like Jonathan said, the information's out there. There's just nobody in the mainstream who's interested in talking about it yet. But if feminism really wants to actually stay a movement and stay a thing, they're going to have to start actually considering some of these criticisms, rather than just trying to shove them down and punish people who bring them up. And I just want to say one last thing. I encourage everybody here who is a non-feminist, you don't have to be an anti-feminist like me. You can merely be a person with no affiliation whatsoever. But a crowd is going to eventually gather in front of that presidential palace. And I just want to let you know, dissenters aren't as easy to pick off when they're all standing together and when they outnumber their opponents. They're a lot harder to take out. So I just want to encourage people here who feel like there are problems in academia, problems in the government, problems in politics, problems in the media, related to feminism and feminist ideology, to please, don't be afraid to speak up. Don't be afraid to speak up. You don't have to be as brutal about it as I usually am. You know, you might want to ease into it a little bit, but definitely the fewer of us who keep their mouths shut, the fewer of us who are silent, the quicker that we can get a lot of these issues that Jonathan was talking about, a lot of the issues of laws like yes means yes in California, dealt with, maybe gotten rid of, the sooner that we can bring some sanity back into the gender debate. So that's pretty much it. Thanks for listening. And, I'm going to have a longer Q&A than Jonathan.
You had 13 minutes left, so if I may, I'd like to make a very quick statement. We can start with that. Okay, I wanted to also mention that Kennesaw State University Men is one of, if not, I believe the only student organization on campus that is assembling a dissenting voice that is of the non-feminist, non-ideological perspective. And for those KSU students who are interested in joining and being a part of this amazing organization, all you have to do is go to Owl Life, the Student Life social media network, and then click Join Organization after searching for KSUMen. Now, as I stated, Karen had a bit more time left, so we're going to add another 10 minutes to the Q&A. And in the meantime, we should be getting our lunch. So, dinner, excuse me. And once the dinner comes in, what I want you all to do is line up in 2 queues on both sides of the table so that we can make sure everybody gets their food most quickly. So with that being said, everybody start lining up. I put a better microphone on, and it's currently off right now, so turn it on when you're up.
You're always making demands of me. It's terrible. It's very terrible. Anybody? Yes.
All right, good.
Yeah, there you go.
In your personal opinion, what do you think the best way to combat radical feminism in academia is?
I don't know that there is a best way. I think constantly challenging. I think promoting events where people, especially people like Janice, who you're going to hear next, can speak, because Janice has looked at both sides, has sort of lived both sides of the issue a little bit, and so she's been looking at both sides from the inside. I was never a feminist. I basically just try to apply as much logic and reason as I can to there and come and speak and try and be passionate about it and stuff. But I think events like this really are going to help. And frankly, there needs to be a lot more scholarly and academic rigor in the social sciences and the soft sciences, the humanities, and particularly interdisciplinary studies. There has to be some standard of evidence, and I'm not going to say peer review, because if all of your peers think that the way you do, they're just going to let things slip through, but definitely academic standards need to be improved. So I'm not sure how to hold people accountable for that, other than just to keep at it, just keep telling them, and keep talking about it to people who might be convinced to care. So.
How you make it up there, Karen?
Well, I haven't had any breakfast, and it's almost dinner time, so I'm pretty
We
hungry.
need to get you a fainting couch for speaking in front of all these.
I
Clutch.
forgot my clutching pearls. I'm sorry.
All right. Well, we'll have to do better for you next.
Yeah, here, let me clutch my mic.
All right. And I noticed that you made a point of mentioning how teachers were encouraging students to go down and try and shut down talks on serious issues that face men.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the women's studies department at U of T, that the one that the Warren Peril protest was the one that I know that they actually, one of the protesters actually said she was there as part of her women's studies program. I'm not sure that the women's studies instructor or professor wanted them to engage in an illegal, violent protest. I don't know whether that was her intention. That was certainly just how things played out when lots of those like-minded protesters all found themselves in the same place. So
Actually, they didn't pull. I don't believe they pulled the fire alarm at the Warren Peril
I
talk.
think they might have.
It was at
It was at Janice's though.
Professor Fiamengo's, and
Yeah.
then they did it again at Professors Nathanson and Young.
Yeah.
And did they do it in Ottawa and Queen's University too? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, it seems
I
to be a
think
standard
they-
tactic to break the law and not even be held accountable to the law.
It was quite interesting because the only two talks in Toronto that sort of went off okay was Professor Miles Groth's talk that I was actually in attendance, and my own. No fire alarm pulling those times, so I don't know, maybe I'm just the kind of rabbit's foot for people, I don't know.
Anyways, I just wanted to point out an observation. Today is November 1st, and I noticed out here in
You
Florida.
got quite the head start there, Danny.
Today is.
No shave November.
Yeah, it's a year old, and actually we'll put a challenge out there. So.
You're actually gonna participate and like put your foot down and not shave all month. I know it, right?
Yeah, that's right. Actually, I'll put the challenge out there. If I see 10,000 donated to KSUMen, I'll shave it or grow it for another year, depending on that 10,000 donation wish. So yeah, there's the challenge.
Oh my goodness.
All right, now, I'd like to make an observation. I see that they have pink ribbon out there. which I come from a mother, I have female relatives, cancer is a nasty, nasty bit of business, and I support that for sure. What I wanna know is why there isn't a blue ribbon out there for prostate cancer.
Yeah, it is actually, I think October was breast cancer month, wasn't it? And November is sort of traditionally, at least for the last few years, considered to be prostate cancer month, or male cancers month, because I think they do a little bit on testicular and penile cancers and things like that as well, donation-wise. But yeah, no, there really should be a little bit more effort, I think, on the part of groups who feel like it's their job to promote events like, the people who decided that it's a good idea to have the blue ribbon out, the pink ribbon out there, they should be taking some responsibility for making things equitable. They absolutely should.
On it.
Are ya?
On it.
All right, good. The problem is, you shouldn't have to. You shouldn't have to tell them.
Well, yeah. Well, sorry.
And there's a lot of really, actually, you should look at NCFM, because call Harry, because he gave me one of those rubber wristbands.
Oh, how precious.
But it says for testicular cancer,
Yes.
awareness, and it says don't be a punk, check your junk. And I just thought it was cute, so you might be able to get some promotional materials from NCFM.
You bet.
All right. Yes?
It seems that non-feminism is heavily concerned with criticizing feminism. So I'm wondering, when does it turn into a movement that's about actually fixing the problems Taylor talked about, where we start talking about men are human as well, like when feminists started out?
Well, what I would really, really like to do is I would love to be able to stop having to oppose feminism and start looking at solving the problems. However, because feminism is the way the government looks at things, because it's you go up to anybody and you say something like Jonathan Taylor said, was it unjust that women didn't have the vote in 1915, right? And yeah, men had the vote then, but most of the men who were drafted against their will weren't old enough to vote, right? Voting age was 21. Some of them, even if they were 21, they wouldn't have been eligible to vote because there were still restrictions, right? But that did not stop the government from taking ownership of their bodies and using their bodies in whatever way the government wanted, right? But we have a one-sided view of history as women were oppressed, and they were oppressed because men were in charge, right? And men were in charge, and they arranged a system that oppressed women for men's benefit, that oppressed women to men's privilege, right? That is not the picture that we need to be starting from, because that's not the picture that existed, right? And all of their efforts, right, and all of their analysis and everything that gets translated into legislation and public policy and all of those things, some of which cause incredible harm to men. A male victim of domestic violence is more likely to be arrested than helped when he calls the police.
Yep.
Right? If his partner is female. And this is because the Duluth model, which is the brainchild of feminists in the 1980s, 70s and 80s, that is our model across the West and the most widely used model in the world for dealing with domestic violence. And that is a model that says men commit domestic violence against their wives to keep them subordinate and make them comply with patriarchal norms. That is the whole theory. And that theory, that affects how judges are trained, that affects how cops are trained, that affects the policies that the cops have to operate under, things like mandatory arrest and predominant aggressor policies, that affects our society's entire response to partner conflict, right? Is infested with a model that there's no evidence for that. There's no evidence. All of the studies that they do where they ask men and women the exact same questions find that men and women beat each other up about the same rates, right? That women are just as violent in their relationships as men are, right? Just as prone to hitting, just as prone to emotional and psychological abuse, slightly more prone to jealousy and coercive control, you know, do a little bit less damage, but certainly like to make up for it with using weapons, right? So, you know, we have reality happening out in the rest of the world, and in all of our institutions, we have this fantasy that was cooked up by women working from a patriarchal model of how they believe the world works and how they believe men and women interact in it. That is not what is going on out there. That is not what has ever been going on out there. People are suffering because of this. And frankly, I mean, while I am very, very much in favor, you know, of letting boys wear pink if they feel like wearing pink, and you know, finding more relaxed ways of being masculine, I'm at this point, I have to be at least as concerned about the guy who goes to jail because his wife beat him and managed to be crying when the cops arrived, right? I have to worry about, you gotta do triage, right? And if the reason that happens is because we're working from a feminist model, then we need to start dismantling feminism, so.
So I have a follow-up question.
Okay.
So you're saying instead of developing our movement, our own policies in order to change things, because I'm an activist here on KSU,
Mhm.
we tend to change a lot just by developing our own policies and actually working with people,
Mhm.
that instead we should criticize feminism until it decides to change.
Well, you know, honestly, feminism can change or it can choose not to change, right? But when you looked at those pictures of those protests, I mean, Warren Farrell, the man that they were protesting with the human barricade, he's the most soft-spoken former feminist, right? He was twice elected to the board of directors of the New York chapter of the National Organization for Women. He made most of his money in his early career speaking from a feminist perspective, right? Until he started asking them questions. Well, this doesn't make sense. Well, that doesn't make sense. Well, actually, I think this, you know, I think you might have it wrong here. And then out he went. You know, you get the boot, right? And then we don't want to talk to you. And then we're going to send people to protest your speech, and we're going to have, you know, we're going to dig up one out of context quote from one of the many things that you've written, one of the hundreds of thousands of words that you've written. We're going to take it out of context, hand it to protesters, and have them scream that you're a rape apologist. Like, how do you work around those kinds of people without just pushing through them? How do you work around that?
So I have one last question. I'm sorry, that's so many.
But before you get to that, I need to make one quick thing. I'm sorry.
Just want to let you all know that since we're about to get started with dinner, you can take extra time for the Q&A if while other people are getting up to eat. If you're in line right now and you want to get your question in and you missed the opportunity before, we'll go ahead and extend it as long as Karen wishes to continue answering questions. It's up to her after the... Yeah, I know you don't. But you've been... Sit there and deal with it.
All right.
It's on video.
Yeah, right? So, anyway, sorry, patriarchal norms, nothing will ever happen.
Nothing will ever happen.
Well, anyway, I wanted to go ahead and just state that we're a little over the halfway across, but if you guys wanted to continue asking questions and Karen still want to do it after the Q&A session time is over, while other people are getting their food, you can continue. So that's all that's being said. Jimmy John's is currently finishing up their delivery, and we'll begin eating in just a few minutes.
Okay, so everybody who's currently in line, I'm prepared to give you a go, but no newbies. All right.
I'm really sorry for taking so much time. But just about every movement in this country has started from being in peril and then saying, wait, we have to go out and actually do something about this. So I'm wondering, when does the do something about this kind of start?
There
we
are-
start
there are
developing
people-
our own policies, because everything I always hear when it comes to men's rights is always, let's criticize feminism. Feminism isn't doing enough for us. I want our own.
I don't want feminism to do anything for us.
No.
I want feminism to disengage, right? Because MRAs did not start this hostility. They did not. They dissented, right? The first of them dissented, and they've been marginalized ever since. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm a gamer.
All right.
One question I want to ask is, you know, you talk about a it's getting people they don't like out of areas where they're prominent, such as, news sites and whatnot. How would gamers and other people interested in getting feminists out of places that we don't want them, introducing their policies to things that we enjoy? How would we go about getting them out of things we don't want them in?
Money. Money will do it. Did it for Intel, did it for BMW. It honestly, getting things done, this is the thing about Gamergate, is it's a consumer movement, it's a consumer revolt. Nobody's gonna fire you from playing video games. Nobody's got the power to make you stop playing video games. You have all the power in the world to stop buying video games. If you think that your hobby, the thing that you do for enjoyment, not because you need to pay the bills, your hobby that you do in your spare time and that you put money into because you love it, right? You have every power to say to companies, I'm not going to buy your product anymore because I feel it's preaching an ideology to me, or because you are advertising your game through a corrupt website that has basically taken a giant crap over your consumer base, right? I mean, you guys have way more power collectively than a man like Larry Summers could ever hope to have. I mean, he just 6 months of apologizing, it still wasn't good enough, and down he went, right? Now you guys, you're virtually untouchable. I mean, if as long as you stick together, you've got the collective power in this conflict. So, Dean.
Hello, Karen. I suppose this somewhat gets to the earlier gentleman's question. I look at feminism as having two different components, and there's a question buried in this. One, there is a multi-billion-dollar industry that runs, we're talking about multiple billions of dollars that runs women's shelter programs that exclude men, rape crisis counseling that excludes men or serves only a tiny little minority of men that they've marginalized, put on the margins, runs these, women's studies programs with professors with making $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 salaries and benefits. This is a multi-billion-dollar empire. People laugh when you say it's a multi-billion-dollar empire, even though you can prove it. And then you have what we call the coffee shop feminists. And what I run into, time and time again, who basically tell me, if I just accept feminism into my heart, I will be saved. Just insert Jesus for feminism, or you put it in Jesus, and feminism is the magic answer to everything. And I've had at least 1 or 2 feminists tell me they'll never give up the label because it's so important to their identity.
Oh yeah, no, this is.
Do you think there's any way of getting through to those women to say, you are supporting a corrupt, evil, abusive ideology? Is there a way to get through to them without hurting their feelings?
Okay, without hurting their feelings, have we sunk that low that we're here to spare people's feelings? Because I didn't get the memo, and I think I just mostly just went way off the theme for my whole talk. Okay, so basically, someone who believes it in it to that extent, I don't, like I said before, and I've said this a bunch of times, I don't think that you're going to really convince them. The moment that you start talking, the wall comes down, and they believe it for a reason. I mean, obviously, it speaks to them on some instinctive level, because when you show them this piece of research or that piece of research or whatever, they have an excuse as to why it's not valid. They have an excuse as to why they don't need to look at it. These are the people who say, oh, I can't stand Girl Writes What. I've never sat through more than a minute of one of her videos. Well, then how do you know whether you like my opinions or not, right? You've never actually listened to one, other than you heard that I was an anti-feminist, and so you just reacted to that. So, I mean, there's no way to convince those coffee shop feminists, I don't think. I think a lot of them will wake up when their boyfriends or fathers or sons or husbands fall afoul of the system, maybe. But yeah, no, it's sad to me, because a lot of them are learning it in school, right? A lot of them are learning it in university. And it really is, you know, it is a captive audience. It is like a priest at a pulpit, who has the power to make or break your academic career, right, by flunking you or passing you. It's an abuse to promote things that are not accurate in a classroom setting when you have that kind of power. So. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say, Karen, I love your work. Since you've been doing your work, could you tell me about how much changes you've seen, and what changes do you expect to see in the next 5 years or 10 years?
Oh, there's definitely, like, here's the thing too, is that it's one of the biggest changes is how many, when you see an article that just spouts some blatant falsehood that's been debunked, you know, dozens of times, right? Or some article that's particularly just hostile toward men for no good reason, that generalizes men, right? You find in the comment sections, and it's a lot of them are the same people, but a lot of the comments that you find in some mainstream pieces that are particularly egregious are full of people that I don't recognize, and they're saying, you know, that's some fucked up shit you just wrote. So I mean, like, that's one of the biggest things is I've seen more people speaking up. I've seen more people, you know, just being interested in the issues. More people willing to pull up, you know, put up their sleeves and do the work that it takes, like Canadian Association for Equality. National Coalition for Men is gaining a little bit of traction. A Voice for Men is certainly a responsible part of that because you do nothing but stir the pot, you patriarchal bastard. And, you know, so I mean, it's just very much raising awareness. That's what's changing is the public is becoming more aware, their eyes are opening, so.
I'd like to see us be more mainstream like in India.
Hmm?
I'd like to see us be more mainstream like in India.
Yeah, well, I mean, India has its own serious problems. I think if you look at how they treat sexual assault in campus tribunals is about how they treat it in their criminal system there. So you're not looking at just getting expelled from school, you're looking at going to prison. And one investigator that I saw interviewed, she said, she's a sex assaulted investigator, she said about half of the cases that come across her desk are cases that derive from consensual sex between unmarried parties that the law deems is non-consensual if the woman doesn't get what she wants afterwards, essentially. So they consent to sex, and then she wants him to marry her and he doesn't do it, she files a rape complaint. And then the case is resolved typically by the two parties marrying, and then 10 years from now feminists will be saying, women in India were forced 10 years ago to marry their rapists. So, go ahead.
Hello. In modern feminism, do you see a lot of McCarthyism in it? And also, do you think it will follow the same suit as McCarthyism?
Oh, there's definitely, you know, you are blacklisted. You are persona non grata. You are on that list. Murray Strauss is on that list, and he has been for a long time, and he suffered death threats and bomb threats and public accusations that he beat his wife, all because he published research that prioritized his academic and scientific commitments over his feminist ones. So there's definitely an element of that there. So.
Do you see any positive forces within feminism that are worthy of encouragement and support by the men's human rights movement?
Oh, well, I think that there's probably some positives in feminism. I think that the fact that they actually got people start talking about men and women and changing things, I think that that's positive. I don't much care for the way they did it and the things that they thought needed changing and the things that they thought didn't need changing initially. But and they did do a lot to raise awareness for women victims of domestic violence and things like that. So, and I mean, it's really hard to say, I disagree with a person who helps battered women. That's a shield that they use, right? If you criticize feminism, you want women to be harmed, right? So, you know, it's hard to say. There's so much to pick through, so much negative to pick through. Like, maybe it's time to just stop throwing good money after bad. Is really what I would think. So.
May I approach the throne? I'll make this quick.
Okay.
One of the things I see happening with feminism is something that you see with many movements started by groups that feel that they've been marginalized, feel that they've been oppressed. Once the playing field is level, that's not sufficient for them.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's that sustained momentum or, gee, let's focus our rage somewhere else. But the next horrible thing that happens is it becomes an academic pursuit.
Yes.
So I want to mention a book that I recently read that I found really interesting. It's by a guy named Bruce Bauer. It's B-A-W-E-R. It's called The Victim's Revolution, The Rise of Identity Studies and the Closing of the Liberal Mind. It's a rouser.
I have heard of that book, and yes, that it is one of those things, and it does not hurt, or help rather, it does not help that many feminists have made entire careers out of this. They are making lots of money doing what they do, and they have a body of what they consider to be scholarly work that gives them social status and gives them the status of experts and gives them the status of people who should be listened to. And they've invested their whole lives in this. And so when you try and convince them or you show them a piece of evidence, actually you've got something so fundamentally wrong that it's basically invalidated your entire life's work. Because it was part of the foundation, not just part of the drapes, right? You know, it's very, very hard to root things out once they've gotten that far. And a lot of people, like Dean likes to often comment on the multiple billions of dollars in feminism, activist feminism, and academic feminism and political feminism. It's not just about the money, right? The money certainly is a factor, but it's not just about the money. It's about power, it's about belief, it's about status, it's about all of those things. So it's not gonna be easy to clean house at all. Sorry to have been a bummer. I think I'm done because nobody got up and tried to cheat. Thank you very much.